Okay, this just in. Tom King is being kicked off of Batman at number 85. Wow, what an absolute shock. We don't have the details yet, but I can only see this as a terrible move by DC. If you see my first review, you know I'm not the biggest fan of this run. But story aside, it's a shame that they didn't let King finish his vision. Regardless of how you feel about the story, it could have only been written by Tom King. King has more than left his mark on the Batman already, and it's terrible that we'll never get to read his full story. And story aside, King is an absolute class act. His Batman run has been controversial to say the least, and Tom King powered through all the criticism, hatred, and threats. King took all the negativity coming his way and turned it into positive energy. And for that alone, King continues to impress me. He's not only a dedicated, passionate writer, but a kind, positive, and wonderful person. Now let's roast his Batman run. Sorry, all the best, Tom. Picking off right after Batman's wedding proposal, we have the War of Jokes and Riddles. One thing that is really interesting about this run is the variation of arc lengths. The I Am trilogy were all about 4 or 5 issues, and later on, a lot of the stories are just 2 or 3 issues. But this is an 8-issue long story, so right off the bat we're getting something very different. The story starts with the greatest pillow talk of all time, where Batman tells Catwoman a story about Kite Man in order to show how awful of a person he is. A story, by the way, that Catwoman was involved in. Like, Batman is explaining about a year of Gotham history to someone who already knows about it. Huh? So Batman explains an event that took place early in his career, the War of Jokes and Riddles. Basically, the Joker and the Riddler both realize that one of them is eventually going to kill the Batman, but they both can't do it. So instead of trying to kill the Batman, they end up fighting each other over who is going to kill the Batman. Now that's a dumb enough of a reason for the story to take place, but it turns out that's not really the reason for this thing at all. You see, the Joker is currently depressed, and he's trying desperately to get other people to make him laugh, which is super cool and interesting, by the way. I really like King's Joker in this story. And it turns out the real reason this war takes place, get this, is so the Riddler can kill this guy's kid, make him become Kite Man, and use Kite Man's kite technology to defeat the Joker, so that he would finally laugh. Basically at the premise of this story. Like, what? I mean, it's a dumb reason for any of this to happen in the first place, but you gotta agree, the premise of this thing is pretty cool. It's the Riddler and the Joker going to war with the rest of the Rogues Gallery picking sides. It's a cool premise. And there are plenty of great little moments in the story. When setting up a meeting, Riddler responds with a 37-page letter of detailed instructions. And some of the Joker's jokes are really funny in here. I love the one where he says, "God says come forth, and you shall receive eternal life. But John came fifth, and won a toaster." There's also that cool premise for an issue where Bruce Wayne, the Riddler, and the Joker all sit down and have a 9-course French meal, but the execution of the issue is really off-putting. But overall, I struggle to understand how such a cool premise can be so bad, or how 8 issues can feel so decompressed. One of my complaints about this series is that King never uses internal monologue for Batman, but in this story he does, and it's pretty bad. Like, Batman's narration is so god-awful in this story. Instead of showing any of the actual war, we're just told about it. All the rogues get recruited off-screen, or off-page. Even when we do see a fight between Deadshot and Deathstroke, it's all just Batman talking about how many people they killed. And even if the premise was followed through on, it feels a bit weird. Like, such a massive event feels really off-putting in Gotham City. It's like No Man's Land, except there's no actual disaster. Like, everyone talks about how the only options for the Joker and the Riddler are to go to war. Like, there's no way out of it. Like, yes, there are other options. Like, don't go to war. It's hard to explain, the tone just feels strange. And the whole story is basically clickbait. It's all about how Batman did something so evil that Catwoman would never choose to marry him, which we've heard time and time again, and it turns out none of these things ever matter. So the big reveal is that Batman tried to kill the Riddler and the Joker stopped him. I mean, I don't blame Batman. The Riddler is the biggest dickhead of all time in this story. He's suddenly ripped and has these douchey sideburns. It's such a weird design choice. But it pales in comparison to the giant question mark he carves into his chest and flaunts around for the whole story. It's edgy and bad. Anyway, the revelation that Batman wanted to kill the Riddler is just such a weak ending, because it never really mattered, and it will never really matter. But I did love Selina's response to Bruce at the end of the story. Overall though, the War of Jokes and Riddles was a huge letdown, and one of my least favorite parts of the whole run. Now here's a hot take, the lead up to the wedding stuff is my absolute favorite part of Tom King's run. Well, most of it. And we start with the Rules of Engagement arc. When King brings in other characters, his run is really good. And that's all what this story is about. We have Tiger, the Robins, the League, Talia al Ghul. It's basically a Batman family reunion. And with an upcoming wedding, I really like that King is covering all corners of the Batman universe. The story's pretty simple. Batman and Catwoman go to rescue Catwoman's friend from Talia al Ghul. And there are plenty of great moments in the story. I loved how casual Batman and Talia are, and that Talia is accepting of Catwoman as his wife. And we also get some great dialogue between Dick and Damian, one of my favorite team-ups. I also really enjoyed the Robin's reaction to Bruce's proposal. Like Alfred gathering all the Robins made them assume he has some big secret to reveal. But there are a few things to pick at this story. First off, the dialogue is really repetitive. I feel like I'm repeating myself just telling you guys that, but it's just not natural dialogue. And the worst is how Catwoman says meow, like often, unironically. Also, Catwoman beats Talia al Ghul in a fight. This doesn't make the story any worse, like usually I'm not one to complain about these kinds of things, but Talia should be able to beat Catwoman, no question. But I mean, I guess Catwoman might be uber powerful, considering the random girl she trained killed 237 assassins by herself. But besides those few nitpicks, this was a really solid story. But it pales in comparison to my favorite story in Tom King's run, Super Friends. It's actually kind of 2 stories slapped together to call it a 4-issue arc. First a team up between Superman, and then a team up with Wonder Woman. The 2 Superman issues are the best issues in this run, period. Besides Catwoman continuing to unironically say meow, I've got nothing to complain about in these issues. The first juxtaposes Batman and Catwoman, and then Superman and Lois Lane. Batman and Superman are so busy crime fighting, they keep not calling each other about the wedding. But by working on a similar case, the 2 end up crossing paths. It's a really fun issue, and I love seeing how Catwoman and Lois interact. They play off each other so well. But the second issue is really the kicker. The award for my favorite issue in King's run goes to this one. Basically, it's superhero night at a theme park. So in order to get in, Batman wears Superman's costume, and Superman wears Batman's costume. It's hilarious. The issue is just full of so much fun and humor. I love the running joke of Batman saying no to everything. I thought that was hilarious. And the character moments between Bruce and Clark are top notch. This is what got me really excited about the wedding. The little character moments like these are really what make this era of King's run feel special. But before we can jump into the second Super Friend team-up, a quick word from Batman number 38. Spoilers, it's not good. Basically, Strictly Worse Hush ends up cutting the names of Thomas and Martha Wayne into his face because he wants to be Bruce Wayne. It's weird, it's dumb, it's edgy, no thanks. Anyway, back to Super Friends. Wonder Woman arrives in Gotham to fulfill a promise she and Bruce made. In a realm outside of existence, a man known as the Gentleman protects our universe from an endless horde of monsters. It's a cool premise. But in this world, time works differently. Every second in our world is a day in this world. So Batman and Wonder Woman agree to fill in for the Gentleman to give him a small break. But a small break for the Gentleman is about 10 years of fighting for Bruce and Wonder Woman. Which is weird. Like, it just feels wrong having Batman lived another decade out of nowhere. Like, after 10 years of fighting monsters, how is he not the best fighter on the planet? Well, I mean, he kind of always was, but at least how can anyone even joke about Harley Quinn being a good as fighter as him? Surprisingly, Batman provides a little bit of narration in this issue, which is rare for this run. But the worst part of this story is the clickbait. The first issue ends with what seems like Bruce and Diana kissing, but next issue it turns out that is just not the case. It was just some dumb clickbait to get the audience to read the next issue. I thought it was really unnecessary and off-putting. Also, King's Wonder Woman sounds exactly like his Catwoman. She's very quippy for Wonder Woman. Strange because King wrote Superman so well, but his Diana leaves something to be desired. Overall, a decent little team-up that if you take out a few big things, is a pretty good story. Next up is Everyone Loves Ivy, but I for one certainly don't love this story. Again, this is a great premise with a pretty abysmal execution. Basically, Ivy takes over everyone in the world except for Batman and Catwoman. Cool. She uses Superman to watch over the couple, and even uses the Flashes as punching bags. It's really cool. But the story starts out by throwing us into the thick of things. Like, this feels like the 3rd or 4th issue in a much bigger story. The pacing is just way off. And Ivy doesn't really have a tangible goal. She wants to save the world, but there's no tangible plan, which makes for a weak story. The way information is revealed in this story is really weird. It turns out Batman had a plan the whole time, but because we know nothing about it, we get no internal narration, it just feels like it came out of nowhere. Like, Harley Quinn just kind of pops up, and because she wasn't teased in the entire rest of the story, it feels out of nowhere. And King tries to say that Ivy isn't a villain in this issue, which I think I disagree with. Like, she is really hung up on the fact that she killed a few people during the War of Jokes and Riddles, but it turns out she didn't even kill them, the Riddler did. But like, Ivy has had no problem killing other people. It feels kind of retcon-y and silly in a way. Ivy also mentions Bruce by name, and I don't remember if she already knew that. I think because she took control of the whole world, she just kind of learned his identity, but they don't really make a big deal out of it. And I guess if Catwoman is good enough to beat Talia, she can one-hit 3 Flashes. I am somewhat willing to let this slide because it's probably hard for Ivy to control them, but I'm also not willing to let it slide because anytime a speedster appears in a non-Flash story, they are nerfed way the heck down. Overall, the story felt both unnecessary and boring. There's some cool ideas here, but they're clouded in a bunch of weeds and bad writing. Next up is The Gift, which is basically a Booster Gold story. Like, you take this out of the run and you lose nothing. I think this arc and the Ivy arc were both just made to set up the Heroes in Crisis stuff, and in order to do that, King had to shoehorn Ivy and Booster into mentally ill, out-of-character versions of themselves. But while Ivy's character is somewhat believable, Booster is just way off in this story. He watches a Green Lantern kill himself, and then calls it awesome. What? I do like how Booster plays with continuity here. He's taking a page out of For the Man Who Has Everything, and trying to give it as a gift to Bruce. Cool premise. And he even references Everyone Loves Ivy as a way to deal with the situation. I like the idea of a time traveler kind of losing their mind because they broke reality and are stuck in this new one, but Booster isn't that character. I get where King is trying to take him, and it makes sense. I just don't think it's the right direction for the character. The one Booster moment I did like was how casually his past self reacted to his future self trying to stop him. Like in every other time travel story, things end in a fight between the two versions of yourself. But Booster's just like, yep, I fucked up, do whatever you need to do. There were also a few little fun moments with this alternate reality, one of which was not Dick Grayson wielding guns. But I did like Jason Todd and how he owned Todd's Tires Company. I thought that was a lot of fun. Also, Catwoman only says meow in the story. Not once, several times. It is the only thing she says. Overall, I like some of the ideas in this one. It's just that it isn't a Batman story, and these ideas don't work for Booster Gold. Just like the Ivy arc, the story is very skippable and doesn't add a whole lot to the rest of the run. Next up is one of my most anticipated stories in King's run, The Best Man, Joker's appearance before the wedding. And it's only 2 issues? Like what? Again, we're just kind of thrown into the climax of the story, just like the Ivy one. I could have used a few issues to build tension here, and the story really needs it, because this is the perfect premise for a story. Joker is jealous that Batman is getting married. But unlike the War of Jokes and Riddles, I actually don't like King's Joker here too much. His whole motivation is that he needs Batman to be Batman, so he will stop him from killing anybody. Not my favorite. Joker's whole thing, or more or less Tom King's whole thing, is that Batman can't be happy. Wrong. I don't like this idea, but we'll come back to that. I really like the issue with Joker and Catwoman talking about Batman and his rogues. It's easy to forget that Catwoman used to be a Bat-villain. Their conversation is pretty great, but the context of it is weird. They're both bleeding out while Batman is passed out over in the corner. But there are big time jumps between each page. How didn't they either bleed out, or Batman woke up, or the police arrive? Like, if they didn't add the later panels, it would have been fine. But because they did, it messed things up. The story also ends with Catwoman strangely laughing. Because of the way it's drawn and the fact that it's the end of the issue, it just feels weird. It's a really jarring end of the issue. Overall, the story was a letdown. The story is the epitome of King's things don't actually happen, it's just people talking, but the talking isn't even that good type of story. Like, this story should definitely have been longer. I don't even really know what Joker's motivation in this story was. This is 2 issues of nothing happening, and it's a shame again, because the premise here is really cool. And finally, here it is, the infamous Batman number 50. The dozens of variant covers, the thousands of upset fans, the 48-some pages of no plot and just splash pages done by famous Batman artists. Yeah, this one is bad. The issue got a ton of negativity for many reasons not regarding its quality, which is also lacking. The issue was hyped as this big wedding issue, but unless I read it wrong, no one got married in this issue. But that's not even the biggest reason people hate this issue. DC pushed the hell out of this thing. They squeezed every last penny out of the fans, with an endless amount of variant covers. They even set up a whole tie-in series of the Bat family setting up the wedding, and then in this issue, Batman and Catwoman just decide to get officiated by themselves with some drunken pastor. Like, what? Did anybody writing the tie-ins actually know what happened in this issue? It wasn't even bait and switch, it was just lack of communication. And it's absolutely hilarious how quickly Catwoman just nopes out of the wedding. Like, her friend just mentions that if she marries him, he can't be the Batman anymore. Yeah, well, does she have a PhD in psychology or something? Show me the Bat facts. So Catwoman just says, yup, you're right. Like, this isn't even something she was conflicted about at all leading up to the wedding. Holly mentions it once, and then Catwoman just fucking leaves. Like, she didn't even show up. Bruce was just standing there waiting for her. You could have at least told him. But no wedding aside, this issue is also just bad. There's no story. It's just splash page after splash page of Batman and Catwoman. It's unbearable. The one good moment in this issue was Batman and Alfred hugging. I really liked that. And of course, that brings us to the cliffhanger. It turns out that this whole thing was planned by Bane. And we see him and his minions, including Holly, the Joker, Skeets, Gotham Girl and Flashpoint Batman? What? I can't wait to get into this mess. But for now, that's a wrap on the first half of King's Batman run. The lead up to the wedding was a lot of fun, but issue 50 just made it all feel pointless. It was such an interesting direction for the character, but instead, we got what we got. And don't worry, things get far more interesting from here on out. I'm just not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing.